Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we ascend to an altitude where the air is thin, the silence is absolute, and the secrets are frozen in time. We're talking about a group of seasoned mountaineers, a remote peak in the Canadian Rockies, and a discovery that defies all logic and sanity. This is the story of something found where nothing should ever be. This is the story of the trapdoor found 10,000 feet up a mountain. Our story begins with four experienced climbers, Liam, Ben, Chloe, and David. They were attempting a technical ascent of Mount Ymir, a massive, often overlooked peak known for its brutal, unpredictable weather and sheer isolation. The mountain was not technically the highest in the region, but it was certainly the most dangerous, attracting only the most serious and somewhat obsessive climber. The team was on their third day of the ascent. The weather had been surprisingly clear, giving them an unobstructed view of the vast wilderness below. They were navigating a particularly treacherous section of the mountain, a high ridge known as the Devil's Spine, which sat at an altitude of approximately 10,000 feet. This area was not rock, it was a desolate frozen plateau of packed ice and loose shale. Nothing grew here, nothing lived here, and absolutely nothing human should ever have been built here. It was Ben who saw it first. He stopped dead in his tracks, raising a gloved hand to signal the team to halt. He didn't point or shout, he simply stood there staring at the ground a few yards ahead of them. Liam, the team leader, slowly advanced and saw what had arrested Ben's attention. The plateau was a uniform gray and white of rock and ice. But embedded into this frozen expanse was a square, a perfect square of weathered dark iron. It lay absolutely flat against the shale and was only visible because the wind had scoured the snow away from its edges. It had a heavy iron ring handle resting flush against the surface. It was a trapdoor. A trapdoor 10,000 feet up a mountain, miles from the nearest trail, miles from the nearest cabin, miles from any recorded human activity. The initial reaction was confusion, followed quickly by a scientific curiosity. David, a geologist, immediately knelt down. He confirmed the surrounding rock was ancient granite and that the door was clearly an anomaly. It wasn't modern aluminum, it was heavy cast iron, showing signs of extreme cold and age. "It can't be a vent for a mine," David muttered, his voice barely carrying over the thin air. "There are no minerals up here worth mining, and it's too high for any kind of storage bunker." Chloe, the team historian, tried to rationalize it. Maybe an old weather station built during the Cold War? A bunker for equipment? But Liam shook his head. "Look at the rock work around it," he instructed. "It's not patched, it's built right into the stone. Someone carved out this mountain face just to set this door here." It took the four of them working together over half an hour to chip the ice and frozen debris away from the door's edges. Finally, they pulled the heavy iron ring, and with a tremendous groaning sound, the trap door lifted a foot into the air. A rush of air immediately escaped. It wasn't stale air or musty air. It was a blast of intensely cold but surprisingly fresh air, almost sterile. The team immediately recoiled as a fog of condensation billowed out. Below the trapdoor was a set of crude, uneven stairs carved directly into the bedrock, leading down into total absolute blackness. Liam held a flashlight down the opening. The beam of light disappeared almost instantly after about 20 feet. It was a deep descent, perhaps 30 to 40 feet. They couldn't hear the bottom. The silence that had defined the mountain now seemed to pour out of the hole, a silence far more profound and terrifying than any normal quiet. Liam, the leader, was cautious. "We are not going down there," he stated firmly. "This is too far off the grid. It could be unstable, it could be anything." But curiosity, that strange, dark human impulse, was stronger than their training. Ben argued. "Liam, we just found something that history says shouldn't exist. We have to look." We go down one by one, secured to the safety line. It was a catastrophic lapse in judgment. Liam reluctantly agreed. He was the first to descend. He secured himself to the main safety rope and slowly backed into the opening, flashlight in hand. He reported everything he saw as he went. Steps are uneven but solid. Walls are just raw rock. Feels man-made, not natural. Hold on. There's a landing at about 30 feet. Then Liam reached the bottom. His voice changed. It went from professional to profoundly disturbed. "It's a small chamber," he whispered. "Maybe 10 feet square. The air is freezing," and he trailed off. And what Liam Ben shouted down the hole, "What do you see?" There was a long, agonizing silence. Then Liam's voice returned a thin, strained sound. "It's a room, but the walls are covered in writing. Thousands of symbols. They don't look like any known language. They look like scratches. And there's a hole, a small hole in the back wall. It's about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide. It goes deeper." "Liam, come up," Chloe insisted, sensing the escalating terror. "We photograph it, then we get out." "No, wait." Liam's voice was barely a breath now. "The writing, it's all pointing to the hole. And there's a sound." "What sound?" David asked. "A hum," Liam said. "A very low hum. It's coming from the hole. It's getting louder." Suddenly, the safety rope went slack. Ben immediately shouted, "Liam!" Liam responded. "What happened?" "Nothing." Total silence from below. A new sound then emerged from the opening, a high-pitched, squealing metallic screech, followed by a heavy impact sound, like the sound of a bowling ball hitting a wooden floor. Ben immediately clipped a small metal camera onto the rope and lowered it down the entire length. He pulled the camera back up, his hands shaking so badly he could barely detach it. They immediately crowded around the tiny screen. The footage was short. It showed Liam's initial view of the small carved chamber. The walls were indeed covered in strange, jagged symbols. The camera panned to the small hole in the back wall, and then the camera tilted down rapidly, showing what had caused the rope to go slack. Liam's backpack. It was lying crumpled on the floor. His headlamp still illuminated the small space, but Liam himself was gone. The footage ended abruptly, but not before showing the final terrifying detail. The entrance to the small hole in the back wall was now surrounded by a thick, viscous black residue like hardened tar. It wasn't there in Liam's initial report. It looked like something had rushed out of the hole and then immediately sealed itself back in. The remaining 3 climbers were frozen in place 10,000 feet up a mountain, facing a hole that had swallowed their leader whole. They knew they couldn't stay. They had to descend and call for help. But the descent was a nightmare. They were haunted by the heavy metallic groaning of the trapdoor in the wind, the absolute knowledge that their friend was gone, and the strange dark residue that now covered the rope where it disappeared into the earth. When they finally made it to the ranger station, 2 days later, exhausted and mentally broken, the authorities were skeptical. A trapdoor 10,000 feet up a desolate mountain, a hole that sucked a man into the bedrock. They launched an expensive and extensive recovery mission, but they never found the location. The storm that followed their descent completely buried the Devil's Spine in feet of new snow and ice, making it impossible to locate the exact spot. But the horror did not end there. Chloe was the one who suffered the worst. She couldn't sleep. She would wake up screaming, complaining of a constant high-pitched humming sound in her ears. She said the hum was a language, and she was afraid she was beginning to understand it. Her apartment eventually became littered with drawings. She would take a pen and scratch out the same jagged, nonsensical symbols she had seen on the walls of that small underground chamber. Her husband found her one morning, sitting in the kitchen, carving the symbols into the smooth wooden surface of their kitchen table using the sharp end of a fork. She was completely catatonic. The symbols they discovered were identical to the ones on the camera footage, a language of absolute fear. David, the geologist, tried to find a rational explanation. He theorized that the chamber was an ancient air pocket, perhaps filled with toxic gas that caused an extreme psychotic episode, and that Liam had simply wandered off a cliff edge and the rope snapped on a sharp rock. But that didn't explain the sealed hole or the black residue. And the fate of that final member, Ben, is perhaps the strangest detail of all. 1 year after the incident, Ben disappeared. He didn't wander off the grid or get lost in the mountains. He simply vanished from his own home. He was a meticulous man, a creature of habit. The police found his door locked, his keys and wallet on the kitchen counter, and his car parked neatly in the driveway. Everything was in order except for one terrifying detail. In the center of his living room floor, Ben had carefully arranged a small pile of mountain shale and loose rock. And on top of that small pile, he had placed a single heavy piece of dark weathered iron. It was a small replica of a trapdoor. He had built it himself, and he was gone. It seems that whatever entity or mechanism was sealed inside that cold, dark hole 10,000 feet up, Mount Ymir found a way to reach out and reclaim those who disturbed its ancient, terrible silence. It was a guest who waited in the cold dark, and when it was finally visited, it simply decided to extend the invitation permanently. The trapdoor was not a way to keep things out. It was a lock to keep things in, and once opened, it decided that the time for silence was over. So what do you think was sealed inside that mountain? An ancient secret society, a geological anomaly, or something far older and more alien than human history can account for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me where in the world are you watching this story from. Thank you for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.
This is a challenging request due to the extreme character count requirement, 15,000, which will necessitate a highly descriptive, drawn-out narrative that may sometimes feel repetitive to meet the length quota. However, I will craft the story for title number 2, asterisk, asterisk, she answered a wrong number, and it cost her everything. Asterisk, asterisk, it's all text-to-speech ready English, all numbers written out as words. Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today, we have a story that starts with a simple, unavoidable mistake. A tiny slip of the thumb on a phone screen. It's a story that proves sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who are simply bored and looking for a target. This is the story of a kind woman who answered a call that was never meant for her, and the dark, horrifying price she paid for her simple courtesy. This is the story of asterisk, asterisk, she answered a wrong number, and it cost her everything. Asterisk, asterisk. Our story begins in the suburbs of a mid-sized American city with a woman named asterisk, asterisk, Eliza, asterisk, asterisk. Eliza was a genuine soul, a mother of 2 who was nearing her 40th birthday. She worked part-time as a librarian, a job she loved, because it allowed Tuesday afternoon was usually whether she remembered to buy milk. This particular Tuesday was perfectly ordinary until the ringing started. It was her cell phone, a number she didn't recognize. She normally ignored strange numbers, but she was expecting a call from the veterinary clinic about her elderly cat, so she instinctively slid the answer button. Hello, Eliza said in her soft, professional librarian voice. The person on the other end was a man. His voice was deep, gravelly, and sounded like he was speaking from inside a barrel. He was immediately aggressive. "Where is it?" the voice demanded. "Tell me where you hid it, or I swear I'm coming for you." Eliza was startled. "I think you have the wrong number," she stammered. "I don't know who this is or what you're talking about." The man went silent for a moment, a deep, unsettling silence that seemed to last an entire minute. Then he chuckled a short, dry sound that scratched at Eliza's ear. "Wrong number," he repeated, his voice, now dangerously smooth. No, I don't think so. The people who tell me things are never. She ignored it. It rang a second time, a third time, a fourth time. It rang a fifth time, and she knew she had to answer it to make it stop. I told you you have the wrong number, she said sharply. I know you did. The man's voice returned a chilling calm, replacing the initial aggression. And that's okay, because I don't need the right number anymore. I just needed the right asterisk asterisk. You asterisk asterisk. That was the line that turned this from an annoyance into an absolute horror. He continued, I have a new number for you now. It's the number of your children's school. Do you want me to call it? Or do you want to listen to me tell you what I'm going to do to your life instead? Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She sank onto the kitchen chair, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. He had crossed an insurmountable boundary. He was no longer a random voice, he was a very specific threat. This began a terrifying period that lasted several weeks. The man whom she mentally dubbed asterisk asterisk, the caller asterisk asterisk, didn't call constantly, but he called strategically. He would call late at night, just when she was drifting off to sleep. He would call right before she left for work. He never asked for money or ransom. His goal was purely psychological destruction. I saw you at the park today, Eliza. From a month ago. It was surveillance from asterisk asterisk 10 asterisk asterisk minutes ago. The horror deepened when the caller started dictating Eliza's life. One morning, the twins, Mia and Jake, had a field trip planned to a local museum. Eliza was buckling them into the car when her phone buzzed. The museum is too far, the caller's text read. You will cancel the trip and take them to the library instead. Or I will make sure the museum trip is very, very memorable. Eliza tried to resist. She was not going to let a psychopath control her family's schedule. She started driving towards the museum, her heart pounding a frantic drum against inches, but crashing into the concrete divider with a deafening roar. Traffic instantly stopped. The noise, the chaos, the near-death experience. It was a sudden, brutal, and terrifying display of power. Her phone buzzed again. See, Eliza the caller wrote, I told you I could make things memorable. Next time the focus won't be on the highway, it will be on the back seat. Shaking uncontrollably, Eliza immediately U-turned. She drove the children to the library and spent the rest of the day looking over her shoulder. The message was clear. Asterisk asterisk obey or face the consequences. Asterisk asterisk. Andrew insisted they go to the police. They went to the precinct and laid out the entire bizarre story. The wrong number, the detailed stalking, the terrifying crash. The detective, a man with tired eyes and a skeptical coincidence, a very frightening one, but a coincidence nonetheless. There's no physical crime here. There's no point of entry. Until he asks for money or physically harms someone, all we can do is tell you to change your number and get a dog. The advice was useless. Eliza knew changing her number wouldn't matter. The caller didn't need her number anymore. He had her asterisk address, asterisk her routine, and most terrifyingly, her fear, the psychological torture ramped up. The caller started giving Eliza tasks designed to humiliate and isolate her. "Tomorrow you will go to the market," he texted late one Friday. "You will wear your pajamas and you will stand in the produce aisle and sing a lullaby for a full 5 minutes. It was insane, humiliating, and completely arbitrary, but Eliza had Mia and Jake to protect. The next day, Eliza drove to the market wearing her frayed silk pajamas. She stood next to the organic cabbages, and with tears running down her face, she sang a trembling version of a nursery rhyme for 5 agonizing minutes. She tried to leave the house or answer a phone that wasn't the caller's. Their beautiful, ordinary life was crumbling because of one wrong button press. The financial pressure began to mount. Andrew took an extra job working nights at a warehouse far across town, a job he hated. He had to be gone from 9 in the evening until 7 in the morning, leaving Eliza alone with the children. The night he started that second job, the caller called. "Poor Andrew," he mocked, "working hard to protect you. What he doesn't realize is that all the money in the world won't stop me. Tonight, I'm coming to see you, Eliza." Eliza felt a scream bubble up in her throat. She locked every door, every window, every possible entry point. She grabbed the heaviest kitchen knife and sat at the bottom of the stairs, shaking her head and praying. The hours ticked by agonizingly slowly. Nothing happened. No breaking glass, no forced entry, no sound at all. Then, at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. It was the caller. Eliza answered it, her voice a raw whisper. "Did you really think I meant I was coming inside?" The caller chuckled. "I came inside your mind weeks ago, Eliza." The lawn was dark. Suddenly, a single bright spotlight snapped on. It was blindingly bright, pointed directly at their living room window, and standing in the light, looking directly at her, was the caller. He wasn't wearing a mask or a hood. He was an unremarkable middle-aged man, slightly overweight, wearing a simple black rain jacket. His face, however, was utterly terrifying. It wasn't menacing or cruel. It was bored completely devoid of empathy or emotion. He simply raised one hand and gave her a small, almost friendly wave. Then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the darkness, the blinding light turning off just as quickly as it had appeared. Eliza never saw the caller again. He never called or texted after that night. Marriage could not withstand the constant pressure and the total breakdown of their lives. They divorced quietly, one year later. Andrew moved away, taking a job 2 states over. The worst part, Eliza had to move out of her beautiful suburban house, the place where her children grew up. She sold it and moved into a tiny ground floor apartment, convinced that she would never truly be safe again. The caller didn't steal her jewelry or her savings. He stole something far more valuable, her peace, her sanity, her marriage, and her entire future. All because she answered a phone call that was never intended for her. The police classified the entire thing as a series of unexplained harassment incidents that simply stopped. No arrests were ever made. The caller was never identified. The question asterisk are asterisk asterisk a target, and it all started with one wrong number. So, what do you think happened to the caller? Did he find a new wrong number to terrorize, or is he still out there bored and waiting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching this story from? Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, let's set the scene. The year is 2007. We are in a quiet, unassuming suburb of Portland, Oregon. The house in question, a two-story colonial with a detached garage, looked perfectly normal from the outside. It was the kind of house you wouldn't look at twice. And that's exactly what made what happened inside so terrifying. The couple who bought it were Mark and Julia Hayes. Mark was a history professor, a pragmatic man who believed in facts and documented evidence. Julia was an artist, creative and open to possibilities, but still grounded. They were in their late 40s and looking for a fresh start. They bought the house located at 3734 Willow Creek Road. He left the study to grab coffee. When he returned only 5 minutes later, the letters were gone. He tore the room apart. Julia helped him. They searched for over 2 hours. Nothing. Mark, annoyed, blamed himself. He figured he must have moved them to a shelf while on the phone, forgetting the entire transaction. 3 days later, the letters reappeared. They weren't tucked away or hidden. They were back on the left corner of the desk, in the exact pile he had left them in originally. Mark was stunned. He hadn't touched the desk since the search. Julia hadn't been in the room. This wasn't just misplacement. This was a momentary, physical relocation of objects. The incidents escalated and began to involve their memory. Julia started forgetting conversations. Mark would mention something, say, a dinner reservation they had made for the following Saturday, and Julia would look at him blankly. Reservation for what, Mark? We agreed we were ordering pizza, she would insist. She would be so firm, so absolutely certain of her memory that Mark would start to doubt. Mark was downstairs watching television. He paused the show and went upstairs to the master bedroom to retrieve his glasses. He walked into the room, grabbed his glasses from the nightstand, and walked back downstairs. He unpaused the television. He watched maybe 30 seconds of the show before he looked down. He wasn't wearing his glasses. He checked his pockets. Not there. He realized he had walked upstairs, gone into the room, seen the glasses, and somehow returned downstairs without them. It was a blank spot, a momentary loss of logic and purpose that only lasted the time it took him to walk down the stairs. But here is where it gets truly unsettling. He didn't realize his mistake until he got back downstairs. It was as if a piece of his consciousness had been momentarily muted. Julia was also experiencing this sense of being muted. One afternoon, she was upstairs painting in her studio. She needed a specific shade of crimson paint. She went downstairs, walked into the kitchen, a detailed log of every object misplaced, every memory lapse, and every time they had to recheck a room because it felt wrong. They quickly noticed a disturbing pattern. The lapses in memory, the misplaced objects, they almost always occurred when they were moving between rooms, specifically when they were on the stairs or passing through the main hallway. The house itself seemed to be the trigger. The most terrifying moment happened in the month of October, 5 months after they moved in. Julia was in the living room. She glanced down the long main hallway toward the kitchen. She saw Mark standing at the kitchen counter reading a newspaper. She called out to him, "Mark, can you take the dog out in a minute?" Mark didn't move. He just kept reading the paper. Julia called again, louder this time, "Mark." Still no movement. She sighed and started walking down the hallway towards him. As she took maybe 3 steps, she realized something was deeply wrong behind her wearing the gray sweater. "What's wrong? Why are you screaming?" he asked, genuinely alarmed. Julia pointed frantically down the hallway. You were just standing there, in the kitchen, reading a paper." Mark walked to the end of the hall. The kitchen was empty. There was no newspaper. Julia was trembling. She hadn't seen a ghost. She had seen a duplicate of her husband a few feet away in a different outfit. But the truly chilling detail was that the real Mark had been directly behind her the entire time, meaning the Mark she saw in the kitchen was standing there while the real Mark was approaching her from the living room. They called a therapist. They feared they were both experiencing shared psychosis. The therapist, a skeptical, no-nonsense woman, listened to their detailed logs and recommended they leave the house immediately. She couldn't explain the missing object. Then he noticed something that was not normal. There was a section of the hallway wall near the coat closet that was painted a dark, unsettling shade of maroon. In real life, that section of wall was painted the same pale cream as the rest of the house. Mark immediately stopped packing and went to that spot on the wall. He touched it, smooth, painted cream. He backed up, looked at the mirror. The mirror still showed the maroon wall. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it at the spot. Nothing changed. The reality was cream. The reflection was maroon. Then he noticed a tiny, almost invisible seam in the wallpaper where the mirror showed the maroon section. He peeled back the cream wallpaper. Underneath, he found 2 layers of old paint. The bottom layer was a dark, dried blood maroon. He called Julia over. They spent the next hour pulling down all the wallpaper in that section. The maroon paint, it was a written chronicle of the same exact psychological chaos they had been experiencing. Someone else had lived in that house and been systematically stripped of their sanity and memory, just like Mark and Julia. The house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by a psychic residue of madness, the building itself feeding on the confusion of its residents. Mark and Julia left the house that day, leaving all their furniture behind. They sold it months later, disclosing everything they knew to the buyers, a large investment firm. They never got any confirmation, but they heard rumors that the house was immediately torn down and the lot paved over. To this day, they still occasionally catch themselves confusing a memory, or looking for an object they know they put down but cannot find. They call these moments the house tingle, a horrifying little reminder that the house may have been destroyed, but the infection it planted in their minds is permanent. And that, my friends, is one of the most terrifying examples of a physical location driving a person, or in this case, a couple, completely and utterly insane. It's a truly strange, dark, and mysterious story. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there. Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we venture deep into the heart of a vast, unmapped wilderness, a place where ancient forests whisper secrets with 25 years of experience. His current assignment was a routine 5-day, 4-night trek through the remote sections of the Blackwood National Park, guiding a group of 4 inexperienced hikers. Sarah, a photographer, Mark, an amateur survivalist, Emily, a quiet nature lover, and Ben, a college student glued to his phone. The first 2 days were idyllic. They hiked through towering forests and set up camp under a canopy of stars. The air was crisp, the wildlife abundant. The unsettling feeling began on the morning of the 3rd day. They were following a well-established trail, one David had walked dozens of times. Yet, as they emerged from a particularly dense grove of ancient pines, the trail seemed to carry a faint, sweet, cloying scent, like decaying wildflowers mixed with something metallic. David attempted to backtrack, but the path they had just taken seemed to have twisted and warped, making it impossible to see their original entry point. It was as if the forest was actively trying to confuse them. That night, around the campfire, the group grew uneasy. Emily complained of a persistent, low-frequency hum that she felt in her teeth, a sound no one else seemed to hear. Ben, whose phone had lost all signal, showed David his compass, which was spinning wildly. The sun bent 4th day to a chilling discovery. Sarah's camera, which she had meticulously placed in her zipped-up tent, was gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just an inexplicable absence. David examined the perimeter. The trees had moved overnight. A massive, gnarled ancient oak, which had been 100 feet away, was now standing directly at the edge of their fire pit, its colossal roots snaking across the ground like thick, dark veins. Its bark was a deep, almost black hue. Emily suddenly screamed, pointing at the oak. A small metallic object was protruding from a crevice in the bark, the lens cap of Sarah's camera. The tree had somehow absorbed her camera. David felt a cold horror. This was not a normal forest. This forest was alive, aware, and capable of things that defied natural law. The trees weren't just trees. They were an active, predatory ecosystem. "We need to get out of here. Now," David commanded. "Forget the trail. We cut straight east to the ranger station." They started hacking their way through the dense undergrowth, but the forest themselves, a massive, freshly fallen redwood, crashed down behind them, cutting off their retreat. Smaller pines rapidly grew in front of them, weaving their branches together to form an impenetrable wall. They were being herded. Mark, in a panicked attempt to gain a vantage point, scaled a huge tree. A minute later, a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest, followed by a sickening crack. Slowly, the giant oak tree they had camped beside began to change. Its black bark seemed to deepen, becoming slick and glistening. A new, grotesque branch began to slowly extrude from its trunk, twisting and thickening into a perfect, sickening mimicry of a human arm. Hanging limp and lifeless from the end of the new branch. Northeast! They ran, but the hum intensified with every step. Then a new sound cut through the hum, a distant, mournful cry, the voice of Sarah, faint and distorted, seeming to emanate from the very air and the rustling leaves. The trees were taunting them with the voices of their absorbed victims. Emily, disoriented, stumbled over a root that seemed to spring up in her path. She fell, hitting her head on a stone. David rushed to her, but her eyes were open, staring blankly. The hum intensified around her. The forest had claimed another. David stood alone, the last survivor, surrounded by the towering, conscious forest. The trees were still moving, encircling him. The ground pulsed rhythmically, and the whispers of Sarah and Mark danced on the breeze. The hum was deafening in his skull. He looked at his hand. A thin, dark, fibrous tendril was slowly beginning to snake out from beneath his fingernail, a tiny, almost imperceptible root beginning to grow from his own flesh. The absorption had the hum its consciousness, and the silence it sought was the absence of anything that was not it. His vision blurred. The rustling of the leaves above him resolved into a single vast guttural whisper, a whisper that formed a single horrifying sentence. "Welcome home, little seed." David Miller was never found. Search parties found nothing but an unusually dense, quiet section of the Blackwood National Park. The ranger station's official report noted the peculiar, unsettling silence and the fact that all compasses malfunctioned nearby. 3 months later, a new sapling, a young pine, was observed growing at an impossible rate directly on the old, now completely overgrown campsite. It was taller, darker, and seemed to hum faintly in the wind. The terrifying implication is that the national park is a vast, ancient biological intelligence that continuously expands. Integrating the world are you watching this story from? Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.
Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we venture out onto a forgotten stretch of pavement, a road that exists in the shadows between two worlds. This is a terrifying tale of obsession, an impossible destination, and the ultimate price paid for driving where you don't belong. This is the story of the vanishing road that only appears at midnight. Our story begins with two young men, Mason and Tyler. They were best friends since high school, two average guys with a shared unhealthy obsession for the strange, dark, and mysterious. Specifically, they were fascinated by phantom roads, stretches of highway, or local byways that, according to urban legend, suddenly appear or disappear, usually under specific climatic or temporal conditions. They spent their weekends chasing obscure legends from the darkest corners of the internet all across the American Southwest. Their focus narrowed to a particular local legend in their home state, one that whispered of a section of road known only as the Line. The legend claimed a straight, desolate stretch of tarmac that would briefly manifest between the hours of midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning, linking an ordinary rural highway with an ancient abandoned town in the desert, a town that was otherwise completely inaccessible by land. It was a physical glitch in the map, a temporary rift only open for 60 minutes. For 5 years, Mason and Tyler had been hunting the line. They had driven the route over 100 times between 12 midnight and 1 in the morning, using high-end GPS equipment and dash cams, trying to capture a single fleeting image of the phantom road. They found nothing. Until that one night in late October, the conditions were perfect. It was a cold, clear night with no moon. They were driving the target highway, which was a standard 2-lane asphalt road lined with scrub brush and dead cacti. The clock in the car digital red numbers read exactly 12 o'clock midnight. Mason was driving and Tyler was in the passenger seat, staring intensely at the GPS screen. The GPS showed their car on the designated highway, but suddenly the map software glitched. The familiar blue line of the road they were on abruptly ended, and a new unmarked gray line materialized, running perpendicular to their current location. "Mason, stop!" Tyler yelled. "It's there! Look at the data! It's not a mapping error, it's a completely unsurveyed road section that just materialized on the satellite feed." Mason slammed on the brakes. He looked through the windshield. The road ahead looked normal. He looked to the right, just empty scrubland, but he looked to the left, and there it was. Running off the shoulder of the normal highway was a new road. It was perfectly straight, completely unlined, and made of a darker, rougher asphalt than the highway they were on. It looked like it had been freshly poured that afternoon, yet the edges were already covered in a thin layer of fine white dust, a dust that did not match the reddish dirt of the surrounding desert. It was exactly where the legend claimed it should be. The line. Mason slowly pulled the car onto the strange road. The transition was immediate and unsettling. The smooth, familiar rumble of the highway instantly turned into a dull, heavy thudding sound beneath the tires. The streetlights from the distant town disappeared, immediately replaced by an absolute suffocating darkness broken only by their high beam. "We have to be fast," Mason whispered, his voice tight with adrenaline. 60 minutes, Tyler. We hit the end, we get the proof, and we get out." They drove for what felt like an eternity. The road was unnaturally straight, a corridor of darkness running through nothingness. They were both professional equipment operators by trade, and they estimated they had traveled at least 15 miles, yet the GPS was still malfunctioning, showing the road ending just 1 mile ahead of them. Suddenly, Tyler screamed. "Look at the clock!" he shrieked, pointing at the digital dashboard. The clock read 12 o'clock and 13 minutes. "So," Mason asked, "we're making good time." "No, Mason, look at the clock on the dashboard," Tyler insisted. Mason looked down. The car's internal clock, which had read 12:13, was now flashing the exact time they entered the Phantom Road, 12 o'clock midnight. The time had completely reset. They had been driving for over 10 minutes, yet mathematically speaking, they had just started the journey. A creeping horror settled over them. They weren't just driving on a new road, they were driving outside of normal time. They continued driving. Every few minutes, the car clock would tick forward for a few seconds, reaching perhaps 12:16, only to snap back violently to 12 midnight. The journey was simultaneously fast and utterly stationary. After what their intuition told them was almost 30 minutes of driving, they finally saw it, the end of the road. The asphalt simply stopped. It dissolved into a patch of old crumbling concrete surrounded by a broken fence. Beyond the fence was a town. It was a perfectly preserved relic of the 1940s. There were old brick buildings, a rusted gasoline pump, a dusty storefront with a faded sign that read "The Junction Diner," and a row of clapboard houses. The entire town was bathed in an unsettling gray-blue moonlight that seemed to originate from nowhere. There were no lights on, no sounds, no signs of life. It was a perfect ghost town. Mason pulled the car onto the old concrete lot and slammed the gear into park. "We made it," Tyler whispered, breathlessly grabbing his camera. "The impossible town. It's real." They quickly got out of the car. The air here was heavy and stagnant, completely silent. The only sound was the clicking of their camera shutters. They started walking towards the diner, taking pictures of these strange, anachronistic details. As they walked past the diner, they noticed something terrifying. The windows were opaque with dust, but etched into the grime of one window was a message. It was written in a perfect childish script. It read, "Don't look up after the clock ticks 5. They ignored it, dismissing it as old graffiti from previous explorers who had probably never made it this far. They wandered for what felt like 10 minutes, documenting everything, when Mason's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was the alarm he had set, 12:45 a.m., time to get out. They started jogging back towards the car, eager to escape the suffocating silence of the town. As they reached the old concrete parking lot, they froze. The road they had driven in on the line was gone. The strip of dark asphalt running off the main highway was completely replaced by dense scrub brush and a wall of thick blackthorn bushes. The access point they had used had simply vanished. They were trapped in the abandoned town. "The clock," Tyler muttered, his voice laced with pure panic. "We missed the window." Mason scrambled for his phone. He looked at the time, 12:48 a.m. He looked at the car clock, still frozen at 12 midnight. He looked at the sky and saw the strange gray-blue moonlight. The laws of physics had completely broken down here. "We have to find the highway," Mason yelled, desperation flooding his voice. "We hike it. The highway can't be more than 15 miles away." They ran back into the town, searching for a way out, a trail, anything. They ran past the diner, again. Mason glanced at the window where the message was etched. It was no longer there. The dust was smooth and undisturbed. A new chilling sound reached their ears. It was the sound of a clock ticking. A huge, heavy, slow tick-tock that seemed to originate from the town square. It wasn't the sound of an ordinary clock. It sounded like a grandfather clock the size of a car. They followed the sound to a dusty brick building that looked like an old municipal office. Inside, through the cracked windows, they saw a massive pendulum clock standing in the center of the room. Its hands were thick black and moving with agonizing slowness. The long minute hand slowly clicked to the 5's position. As the large hand clicked to the 5, the clock emitted a low, reverberating chime that shook the glass in the window. It sounded exactly like the chime of a church bell. 5 long, solemn chimes. The moment the 5th chime faded, the gray-blue light in the town changed. It became intensely red, a deep, pulsing crimson light that flooded every street and alley. Then they remembered the message. "Don't look up after the clock ticks 5. They ignored the urge and ran blindly through the red light, their feet pounding the concrete. But as they ran, they felt a sudden and profound change in the air pressure. It felt like being submerged deep underwater. Tyler couldn't resist. He stopped and slowly tilted his head back, his eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and dark curiosity. He looked up. What he saw defied description. It wasn't the sky, it wasn't clouds or stars or even blackness. It was a swirling mass of geometric shapes and impossible colors, a kaleidoscope of wrongness, a vision of something immense and ancient that existed outside the realm of human perception. It was a brief vision of the immense non-Euclidean reality that this town was plugged into. He didn't scream, he didn't even make a noise, he simply collapsed. Mason rushed to his friend. Tyler was alive, but his eyes were wide open and completely blank. His pupils were fixed and huge, staring sightlessly at the red sky. He was totally unresponsive, catatonic. Whatever he had seen in that fraction of a second had completely erased his conscious mind. Mason dragged Tyler's unresponsive body back to the car. He locked the doors and started the engine. He didn't know what to do. He was trapped in a town that existed outside of time, with a friend who had lost his mind and a clock that was counting down to something unknown. He looked at the digital car clock. It still read 12 midnight, but the large pendulum clock in the square was still ticking. The minute hand was now moving towards the 10 position. Mason sat in the car for what felt like hours, but was perhaps only 15 minutes by his wristwatch. He watched the massive clock. He waited for the hands to align to midnight, the time the road had appeared. Finally, the hour hand and the minute hand of the gigantic clock approached the 12. At exactly 12 midnight, the clock did not chime, it did not tick, it simply vanished. The heavy brick building it was housed in remained, but the clock, the source of the terrible timekeeping, was gone. And then Mason saw it. Just as the clock disappeared, a faint dark line of asphalt shimmered into existence right where the blackthorn bushes had been. The line had reappeared. Mason didn't hesitate. He shifted the car into drive, shoved the gear lever to the floor, and sped across the rough concrete, pulling Tyler's lifeless body with him. He hit the dark asphalt of the line and drove. He drove faster than he had ever driven before, praying that the road would hold until he reached the normal world. He drove for a long time. The clock on his phone showed 1 o'clock in the morning, the designated end of the window. And just as the phone clock clicked to 1 o'clock, the familiar strip of yellow dividing line appeared beneath his tires. He was back on the normal highway. The sudden change in sound and light was jarring and comforting. He looked in the rearview mirror. The line, the dark phantom road, was completely gone, replaced by the monotonous scrub brush of the desert. Mason was the only one who truly returned from that trip. Tyler remains in a care facility to this day, completely unresponsive, staring at a spot on the ceiling that only he can see, a spot that Mason assumes resembles the terrifying kaleidoscope he glimpsed that night. Mason still owns the car, but he never drives it after dark. He still has the photos from his camera, but every single image of the Junction Diner and the Phantom Town is hopelessly overexposed to a solid, blinding white light. All the evidence was erased. The only physical proof of the entire terrifying ordeal is the odometer reading on his dashboard. When he started the journey, the odometer read 100,000 miles. When he finished the journey, it read 100,000 miles and 1 foot. Despite driving for miles and for over an hour of subjective time, the laws of this phantom road ensured that his car only physically moved 1 single foot in the real world. The entire journey was a bizarre temporal bubble that simply consumed their time and their sanity. He had found the line. He had found the impossible town, and he learned the dark, terrifying truth that sometimes the most dangerous destinations are the ones that only exist for 60 minutes between midnight and 1 o'clock a.m. So, what do you think was the line? A dimensional pathway, a secret military experiment, or a place that was simply tired of being found? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching this story from? Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.
This story is about the chilling, relentless sensation watched not by a single stalker, but by a phenomenon. Our main character started to notice a face, the same face appearing in every photograph, every crowd, every fleeting glimpse of human life. This wasn't just coincidence. It was a terrifying, systematic intrusion that made him question if his entire world was a carefully crafted stage set just for him. This is the story of he kept seeing the same woman in every crowd. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, let's travel to Chicago, Illinois. It couldn't be quantified or proven with a spreadsheet. The incident that started everything was small, insignificant, and completely ignorable. David was scrolling through his phone, looking at photos from a major city marathon he had attended the previous Sunday. He wasn't running, he was just a spectator. He stopped on a wide-angle shot he had taken of the starting line, trying to capture the energy of the crowd. He zoomed in, just enjoying the chaos, when his eye caught a single face in the dense pack of runners, maybe a third of the way back from the front. It was a woman. She had distinct features, long, straight black hair, a narrow face, and a pair of large, square, red-framed glasses. Photo and went on with his day. 2 days later, David was walking through the crowded downtown train station on his way to work. He was listening to music, lost in thought. As he passed a newsstand, he glanced at a large, brightly colored advertisement for a local theater production. It featured a dozen actors posing together, and there she was. Tucked into the background, fourth from the left, wearing a period costume but otherwise, he stared at the poster for maybe 15 seconds. Then he shook his head. It's Chicago, he thought. There are millions of people here. It's an actor. Maybe she just looks similar to the runner. He took a quick, discreet photo of the poster and walked on. Over the next few weeks, the sightings escalated from coincidence to impossible. David started seeing her in places she couldn't possibly be. He was watching an old documentary on television about the 1950s Korean War, and in a fleeting crowd shot of American soldiers loading onto a troop ship, there she was, the narrow face, the black hair dressed in a Red Cross nurse's uniform. He saw her face or a face identical to hers in a photograph in a college history textbook, identified as a suffragette from the 1890s. He found her in the background of a tourism brochure for a beach in Thailand. The woman was physically identical in every sighting, though her clothing and context changed wildly across time and geography. David wasn't seeing a look-alike. He was seeing the exact same woman consistently. He decided to document everything. Being a data analyst, he created a massive file he titled The Constant. He collected every image, noting the date, location, and context. He even found her in 3 different stock photos used by the company he worked for. He showed his findings to his friend, Michael. Michael, seeing the dozens of photos, laughed. "Dude, this is awesome," Michael said. "It's called pareidolia. Your brain has fixed on a particular facial template, and now you're seeing that template everywhere. It's just confirmation bias, mixed with an average-looking face." To prove his point, Michael printed out 5 random stock photos of crowds, instructing David to find the woman in them. David searched carefully and found nothing. "See," Michael said, "your brain just sometimes gets a little obsessive." David felt relieved. He knew Michael was right. It was a statistical anomaly created by his own mind. He decided to stop looking. He felt fine for maybe 2 weeks. He went back to his life, focusing on his work. Then came the elevator incident. David was alone, waiting for the elevator in his large, modern office building. The walls of the elevator banks were covered in shiny, polished stainless steel. He pressed the button and stood, staring blankly at his own distorted reflection in the steel panel while he waited for the chime. The elevator arrived. The doors slid open. David took a step forward to enter the car when he happened to glance at his reflection in the steel one last time. And this time the reflection was not his. Standing in the steel panel, right behind him, was the woman. The long black hair, the narrow face, the large red-framed glasses. She was standing exactly where he knew the empty hallway to be. And the reflection of her face was completely devoid of expression, blank, cold, and utterly terrifying. David spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. The hallway was empty. He was completely alone. He looked back at the stainless steel. His own normal reflection was staring back at him. This was no longer pareidolia. This was a physical intrusion into his reality. The mirror-like surface had momentarily shown him the truth. The woman was always consistently behind him, just out of sight. David quit his job the next day. He liquidated his assets, sold his condo, and moved to a remote, tiny cabin in rural Montana, an area with a population of maybe 200 people. He cut off almost all contact with the outside world. He felt safe for a few months. He was completely isolated. He never went into town, ordering his supplies online to be dropped off at the end of his long dirt road. No crowds, no photos, no stainless steel. Then, one snowy afternoon, he decided to clean out the cabin's old basement, which hadn't been touched in decades. It was musty, filled with old mining equipment and boxes of junk. He moved an ancient, crumbling pile of newspapers. The top newspaper was from the year 1982, the local Montana paper, and the headline was about a major town council meeting. David used the paper to wipe the dust off his hands before tossing it. But just before he threw the paper into the trash barrel, he caught a glimpse of the photo accompanying the article, a wide-angle shot of the town hall, full of citizens attending the meeting. David dropped the paper. His heart seized up. Tucked away in the far corner of the photo, standing calmly by the exit door, was the woman, the black